Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's kind of grim around here because our friend Kathy Sipe is in the last stages of fighting lung cancer.
Oh.
So it's.
I actually don't know her.
She's a terrifically cranky and wonderful writer. She's sort of constantly annoyed by something, which I find incredibly appealing. And she has a lovely daughter, and she's basically a good person who everybody loves.
Her daughter has a blog, right?
Her daughter has a blog, and her daughter's actually a very good writer.
Right, I remember this.
So her blog is called Sky Watching My World. Anyway, so that's sort of grim.
Yeah, we actually just had a close friend who died, but she was, she had been sick for a long time.
Oh dear. I'm sorry. Anyway, but blogging heads must go on.
Let's go on. I mean, I shouldn't, I guess I should personally feel blessed. Everyone in my household has had the flu, but me. I seem to have escaped it. So.
Famous last words, okay.
No, I took Tamiflu. I think I'm okay.
Tamiflu really works. It's scary.
That's what they claim. Now, does it supposedly induce the fake symptoms the way a vaccine does?
I don't know.
Because I did feel like I had the flu for 3 hours. Well, anyway.
I just know my friends who took it say it is a miracle.
Well,
and
we've...
I wouldn't be a hypochondriac if I didn't have a secret stash hoarded away somewhere. Let's put it that way.
I'm not surprised. Okay, well, so we've been moving from the quite grim to the less grim, and I guess, are we going back to grim here? What are we going to talk about?
Well, I want to talk a bit about the surge because it's starting to sink in more and more that the surge, at least in the short term, seems to be working. There was an incredibly, almost giddy post on Iraq the Model, my favorite Baghdad blog, where he talked about how people are painting the town square bright colors and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it wasn't quite that bad, but it was basically optimistic. And even on the left, if you look at the Huffington Post, she quotes her friend Simon Jenkins, who's a vigorous critic of the war and opponent of American troop presence, who says, hey, the surge is the first smart thing the Americans have done. Too bad they didn't do it 3 years ago. It's too late now. The problem with it is that Petraeus will leave. Well, it's not completely clear why. So if the problem is that we'll leave, why is the solution that we'll leave? That's Jenkins's solution is, well, everything would be fine if we just left and let the Iraqis cut the necessary deals to protect themselves, between the sects, and presumably the Sunnis will say, hey, we don't want to be slaughtered by the Shiites, so we'll agree to this and that. And that's always seemed to me a giddily hopeful, sort of Rumsfeldian notion that, well, if only we leave on the left, if only we leave, then things will be fine. And Tony Blankley has a very well-put critique of that in a piece on Real Clear Politics. Only people on the left think that a government that's only propped up by 150,000 American troops will survive if we leave. They're going to flee. They're not going to survive. At least that's what he says. But it occurred to me that Jenkins' view might have some plausibility on the grounds that you really don't. Suppose you're a Sunni politician. Are you still there?
I'm here. I'm soaking it up. I know a lot more than I did 3 minutes ago.
You're waiting for me to get to the point.
Get to the point, Mickey.
Okay. If you're, Jenkins says, well, they're not going to cut the deal as long as the United States troops are there, even if the U.S. troops are reestablishing stability and, maybe, help strengthening the people we like the Democrats, and weakening the people we don't like the sectarian killers. The deals are not going to get made until we leave because, and I guess the rational argument would be, on the Jenkins side, would be, well, if you're a Sunni politician or a Shiite politician, you're not going to cut the sort of deal that you would make in the state of nature, not because you're stupid enough not to realize that you don't realize you're going to have to cut a deal, but you sort of don't know how strong you are until you actually have an all-out war of all against all, and the Americans leave.
Well,
and it's sort of uncertainty. It's sort of like a game theory thing. It's uncertainty about how you will do that leads to the reluctance to cut a deal, not just sort of anti-American hatred that prevents you from even thinking about cutting a deal.
well, there's an alternative game theory type explanation that I think does the work you want done here, which is just that people cut deals when they see themselves as in non-zero sum relationships. They can, there's a win-win outcome to doing the deal relative to or you could look at it the other way and say there's a lose-lose outcome if they don't do the deal. And the argument could be that it's only when the American troops are at least on the verge of leaving that the alternative to a deal truly becomes vividly lose-lose. They will fight a war and they'll both suffer.
But the win-win, this is what I was trying to figure out. If these deals are to be cut and if, the threat of killing and violence would provoke them, they would have cut the deals long ago because there have been killings, there has been violence, people have been losing, and it's been win-win for a long time. It's clear that if you're a Sunni politician, it's in your interest to cut a deal with the Shiites where you maintain some autonomy and some oil revenues and some minority rights, and you don't try to overthrow the whole government. That's clearly been win-win for a while.
Well,
and why will it be more win-win? It'll just be, why is that not evident to them now before we leave? That's the interesting issue.
Well, I mean, one kind of explanation is differing perceptions as to what they have to gain by continuing. That's a kind of explanation. Another kind of explanation is they don't trust any mechanism that could enforce a deal. Another kind of explanation, these are just classic game theory explanations for failures to reach deals. Well, another explanation is just sheer lack of communication. You don't have the right people talking to each other. And then another kind of explanation is that their local incentive structure is different. You're looking at it in the aggregate, and this is a common kind of failing, I think, in looking at international relations. I don't mean what you're doing, but I mean the reality about the incentives that are driving things always turns out to be more complex than it seems when you look at it in the aggregate as side A versus side B, even though at some level you have to do that to kind of, simplify it and think clearly. But the fact is leaders, individual leaders, and individual Sunnis, interests are not exactly the same as all Sunnis' interests. He may just be making money somehow off of this deal. Women may find him attractive as long as he's in the middle of a war. Who knows? But those are, I think I've listed the main kinds of explanations. Well,
your first explanation, I think, is the same as the one I was groping towards, which is they're competing theories as to how strong various factions are, and that's what I meant by uncertainty. The Sunnis don't know that, if the Americans leave, they're going to be slaughtered by the Shiites until the Shiites start slaughtering them.
Right. It's not clear that their perceptions will actually get clearer once the Americans leave, but they could, or they could get less clear.
Why won't they get clearer? There'll be a war. There'll be a sectarian war, and they'll either win or they'll lose.
Well, yeah, but by that time it's too late to deal. I mean, once you lose, nobody's offering you a deal. Well,
that would be the counter argument. That would be the argument that what happens when the U.S. leaves is they start slaughtering each other, and there is no deal. That's the counter argument to the Simon Jenkins. Things will be fine if only the U.S. troops got out. If the U.S. troops are the problem.
Well, it's complicated.
That's why I don't buy the Simon Jenkins line. I just thought that there was some rationale that he didn't articulate that was lurking underneath there.
Well, what seems to me to be the thing you want to do is use the American presence to, create a couple of things. Some reason to trust in some body of enforcement after a deal is there. Some lines of communication between the two parties. And the third thing may be the threat that the Americans are going to leave, once the two sides clearly understand that they could both lose if the Americans do leave. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a question lurking in the background here, which is when can the Americans leave? and this gets back to what my original skepticism about the surge was, not that the surge couldn't have a pacifying effect in the short run, but what is the longer-term vision of the Americans as they undertake the surge? Are they, A, willing to move towards something like partition and basically accept the ethnic cleansing that's taken place? Or B, are they going to try to undo the ethnic cleansing, which seems to me like a very difficult job? And I notice you've got a sentence in your blog item speaking to this. You say it could be that by naively moving Sunni families back into vulnerable mixed neighborhoods, we may be setting the stage for more bloody sectarian cleansing in the future.
Right.
Or,
well, what about this scenario? What would be so terrible if we have 30,000 troops in Baghdad, we keep the order in Baghdad, and we just leave them there? And we keep the order in Baghdad while the rest of the country is partitioned. Baghdad was always the problem. The problem with partition was always that, well, Baghdad is mixed and it would be the site of a civil war. Well, if we stop the civil war in Baghdad, then the rest of the country can go happily its merry partitioned way under a loose federation. And that status quo happens for 10 years. And we don't lose that many soldiers, so we can bear it.
If you don't think that people will start to kind of chafe under the occupation, and I think there are reasons to think that could happen, but the other question is it the case that Baghdad's the only place where the surge is needed? I mean, I read this piece you directed me to where Petraeus was doing a walkthrough with the guy who wrote the piece, and they were walking through Ramadi, right? And there was evidence that the surge had worked, that they could walk through Ramadi or something? Or anyway, or he described Ramadi or something like that.
Ramadi is I think, the capital of Anbar province. I saw the controversial Pat Dollard showed me and a group of people one of his films about Ramadi, and it's basically a bunch of Sunnis shooting at the Americans. I don't think there are any Shiites really in sight.
Oh, okay.
Or
Well, still, it sounded like
it's not the site of an ongoing. It's not a heavy ethnic battleground. If there's Shiites there, they're either coward or they've fled, I think.
Okay.
That's Anbar province.
The piece I would like to read is, I presume that the surge, if successful now, wherever it's being deployed, which I gather is mainly Baghdad, would have to be extended to certain places before you could have complete success. The piece I'd like to read in some newspaper is, A, is that true? B, on how large a scale, would it have to be expanded?
No, I'd like to read that too, but I always thought that the big problem with partition was, there were a few other flashpoints, but I think Diyala was another one.
Apparently you're right that currently their goal is to reintegrate neighborhoods that have become segregated through ethnic cleansing, and I'm greatly skeptical about how, whether that will not mean that we have to stay there forever. I did this dialogue with Mike Hirsch, and he had talked to some army guy who, used this metaphor about the role of Americans in Iraq, said, it's like the rods in concrete, and Mike said, but wait a second, rods stay in concrete forever, and the guy said, yeah, exactly. And it seems to me, if you create a situation where you have all of these finely modeled neighborhoods, create a bunch of those where they no longer existed for the time being, it just seems to me like the rods are going to have to stay there a lot longer.
Well, right, but that's the scenario I'm proposing. What's so terrible about that? The rod stays there. We stay in Baghdad. 10 years from now, we're still in Baghdad. We're still in Bosnia, for Christ's sake, or we're still in Kosovo. And we're certainly still in Korea, decades after the Korean War. That's not the end of the war. That's a pretty good outcome for this disastrous war. I'd like to know in Bosnia,
and what kinds of situations are we deployed? Are they those kinds of situations? And also, things never reached quite the intensity, the kind of fine-grained intensity in Bosnia. I don't know, but I do think, occupations bring risks that over time things just go wrong. I remember the moment I knew I was opposed to the Iraq War was I don't know how long before it. I was talking to this lady who was Iraqi, had been born in Iraq, and I think grew up there, and she was at the University of Chicago, and she said, everything, she said, it will be fine. The war will be fine as long as the American soldiers are gone within 2 years. And I looked at another guy across the table. We just looked at each other like, I don't think she understands what the plan is. Bush was planning to stay there forever. And this lady was saying, no, that is not going to work. They will, they will get sick of the American presence, and you better not leave them there long.
What about this scenario? We stay there for a couple of years, we pacify the place, and then we're taken over by UN troops, and we get out, and less appealing targets take their place, and also longer staying targets. In other words, it's probably relatively easy to chase out Americans by just killing a bunch of them. I don't know, maybe it's easier.
I don't think UN troops have shown any more staying power.
Maybe UN troops don't have any more staying power, but it's a thought.
It is a thought. And it's it's
you really
about 15 minutes into the dialogue, so...
Okay.
If you have one last insight,
one last insight is, do you really think that in a year, if the surge is working, that it would clearly fall apart if we leave, that people are going to want to leave anyway?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think we've really had a broadly pacifying effect and aren't losing a lot of American troops. I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Yeah, that's what I think, too. Even if they haven't cut the deal that would hold up for eternity. Okay.
And, this is one reason I thought all along the Democrats were making at least a political mistake by insisting on a withdrawal date certain and all of that stuff. I mean, some of them.
Although Thomas Friedman says they're playing a brilliant Mudd and Jeff role, which I think they are, sort of.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah.
So
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think the brilliance may be inadvertent, but...
yeah, no, he says it's inadvertent.
Yeah, okay.
It's clearly inadvertent. Okay, you have the last word. Sort of.
That was it? Thank you.
What's next? Immigration.
Immigration, and we know who usually takes over the show at that point.
Oh, God, that's another one where I talk forever. Oh, well, we got 2 of those in a row.
I'm going to catch some shut-eye.
Okay, well, you just snooze. I'll ring the bell when it's time for you to wake up.
Okay.
And comment. No, it's just, there was a front page piece by Adam Nagurney, which...
A favorite of yours, as I recall,
A favorite of mine, which just incorporated a lot of tropes. Is that the word? That's a good
word.
A good academic word that I've always wanted to use, and I don't know what it means. But a lot of mainstream media ticks that are used to demonize the opposition to McCain, and one of them is calling the opponents of McCain's comprehensive immigration reform anti-immigration. I suppose that's better than anti-immigrant. But I don't even think people who want to restrict immigration are necessarily anti-immigration, and certainly not all opponents of giving a semi-amnesty to illegals who are already here want to restrict legal immigration. I would say let's have more legal immigration, but not more illegal immigration. So that's one mainstream tick. The other tick is assuming, posing the alternative as deportation. Well, the alternative isn't deportation. The deportation is one wildly impractical solution that not even the most vicious opponents of McCain's plan support. They support a strategy of sort of gradual attrition where you discourage illegals and they gradually self-deport, but you don't physically go round up 12 million people and ship them away. And you could just say, let's have the status quo. That's not deporting. You could say, let's have a fence. Fence doesn't deport anybody. It just prevents new people coming. There are all sorts of positions that involve opposing McCain's bill that don't involve massive deportation. As R.H. Tawney once said, that's bombarding a position that nobody occupies. The larger point is that everybody's saying that immigration reform isn't going to happen because, one, the new development is McCain has already been caught up in the campaign, so he does seem to be feeling a lot of heat from the Republican primary voters.
Yeah, there was a piece in the New York Times about how, I guess it was Iowa, that had been a kind of a grueling
That's the piece I'm talking about, Bob. That's the Nagurney piece.
Oh, okay.
But yes, the larger truth in that was...
I must have dozed off during that part, sorry.
Yeah, okay. Wake up. Jeez. And Pelosi supposedly says she won't move a bill unless she has the cover of 100 Republicans in the House. Cato Byrne has a blog item in the corner on that. And there's a general sort of confidence on my side of the debate that McCain's bill isn't going anywhere because he has to give it up if he wants to be president, and Pelosi doesn't have the cover, and Rahm Emanuel doesn't want any of his new vulnerable freshmen endorsing this controversial pro-semi-amnesty bill. I'm not so sure. I mean, welfare looked dead at this point. Welfare reform looked dead at this point in the year, and yet by the summer, it was close to passage. Things can turn around very quickly in Congress when somebody like Pelosi decides, hey, wait a minute, we'd really like 12 million new Latino voters, so even if the Republicans, oppose this, we're going to go ahead with it. So I caution against overconfidence on my side of the debate. I'm sure you're fascinated by that. You can wake up now.
I will not succumb to the lure of overconfidence should I encounter it in the coming weeks, Mickey. I am now steeled against it. But then again, I don't agree with you anyway, so I guess I'm not susceptible to it. Here's my question. It was commonly said early on that immigration was a bigger problem for the Republicans, that is more divisive within the Republican Party, than for Democrats. You were among the people who were skeptical of that widely made claim. And my question is, in the what we're seeing so far of it playing out in presidential politics, are you reconsidering now? I mean, certainly. I don't know. Well, what do you learn from McCain's early experience in that regard?
So far, it's clearly more divisive for Republicans.
It is.
And you have people like the Real Clear Politics bloggers saying, hey, we should pass some sort of immigration bill because that'll end the division within the Republican Party. Well, I don't want them to do something that's bad for America just to end the division in the Republican Party. I don't care if there's a division in the Republican Party. I'm not a Republican. But I do think there are circumstances in which there would be division in the Democratic Party as well. For example, if a leading candidate endorsed the McCain-Kennedy bill, and you got some, Lou Dobbs-like union guy saying, no, this illegal immigration lowers wages of low-skilled workers. There are a bunch of unions that hate it. There's some that like it, and prosecuted that case. Then it would be out in the open, and then I think it would be a split. It's going to be, I guess, it's going to be less of a violent split among the Democrats because on the Republican side, it's sort of cathected with issues of patriotism and maybe a bit of ethnic bias, perhaps. Except even though there are legitimate, completely un-racist arguments on both sides, but I do think it has the potential for splitting the Democrats. It's just they're laying low now, and that's the reason Pelosi wants Republican cover, because she doesn't want to get out there on her own. As we are the people endorsing this controversial bill, because some people in her own party are going to take a shot at her.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. Clearly, in practical terms, it's more divisive for Republicans at the moment. So I'm backtracking.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I mean, to read the Times piece, you got the feeling that actually it wasn't very divisive within the Republican Party in Iowa. It sounded like everyone McCain heard from was not anti-immigration, since you don't approve of that term, but whatever term you approve of.
Enforcement first.
Enforcement first. That's just what I was going to say. Skeptical of immigration.
My greatest fear is that McCain will crater so quickly. McCain would crater so quickly in the campaign that he would give up hope of being president and just focus on passing his immigration reform. That doesn't seem to be happening. He's even getting a little bit of traction this past week.
Oh, he is?
I think so, yeah. I think he's the Giuliani surge has happened, and McCain's out there on his bus now, and he's talking, and he's at least, going and visiting the voters in Iowa, which we hadn't done before, and so he has the carrot is dangling in front of his nose, and if he wants to pursue the carrot and be president, he's got to give up this immigration jag. So that's good for my side.
But a new rival may be appearing on the horizon, Mickey.
Good transition.
Thank you.
Why don't you talk about this, though? Because I've been...
Oh, you probably know more about him than I do. Fred Thompson. I mean, people our age first encountered him during the Watergate hearings as he was the counsel for the Republicans, right?
Yes, he was the Republican equivalent of Sam Dash.
Right.
and you know, he distinguished himself by being relatively nonpartisan and a straight shooter in a way that people respected.
And, you know, you had the feeling he was like a pretty smart guy.
Yeah.
Although, I've got to say, the discourse that I've encountered of his over the last 24 hours, thanks to a couple of links you sent me, was kind of not at a very high level.
Well, since then, he got elected to the Senate. He quit after a term and a half. He filled Al Gore's seat in Tennessee. He quit after a term and a half, having accomplished very, very little. That's my point. Renewed his previous career as an actor. He's on Law and Order all the time. And now he's the logical heir to inherit Paul Harvey's radio show.
Is Paul Harvey... I read in that piece you said that he was subbing for Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey is still alive?
I think Paul Harvey is still alive.
I mean, when I last heard that show, it was back when I lived in D.C., like about 10 years ago, and I would go, like, I'd just listen to it and go, how much embalming fluid is in this guy?
Well, I used to listen to that when I drove Paul Harvey when I drove across country when I was in college, and we know what an old fogey
you are.
I am.
I mean, so he must be in his early hundreds if you were listening to him in college. No, but he goes. Wasn't he broadcasting, like, you know, during World War I or something? I mean, he's
probably
anyway, we digress.
Brilliant. He's brilliant, and I think his role has been supplanted by bloggers because he was the guy who could sort of take the sort of tell it like it is right wing, non-respectable position. And now there are all sorts of people who are taking that position.
There was always also this little heartwarming punctuation to his things.
Right.
It gave you a good feeling about whatever he had said.
Yeah. So, and he endorsed his product. So, and it probably still does. So he's, but the point is, so Thompson's commentary is sort of geared in that sort of Paul Harvey sort of vein. I'm telling it like it is, you know, blah blah blah. His defense of the movie 300 was particularly
no, Thompson sounds much less like Paul Harvey to me than like a blogger. In fact, when you sent me the link to the thing he wrote about the movie 300 in reaction to the Iranians complaining that it was anti-Iranian, you know?
This is something Fred Thompson wrote, right?
That Fred Thompson wrote. I didn't notice who had written. I was reading it and I thought, oh, another kind of hyperbolic blogger. Yeah, you know, another 20-something blogger going slightly nuts. And then I looked up and go, oh no, it's a person who may be the next president of the United States. And it wasn't so much the substance of what he said as just the kind of over-the-top tenor of the rhetoric, right?
Well, I guess he's going for, like, the Reagan Death Valley days era, where Reagan became a spokesman for GE and honed these rabble-rousing speeches that effectively roused the rabble without really crossing the line into irresponsibility.
Reagan?
If you read him now, there's nothing you'd really find.
Well, what cards did he play?
Weird about
Thompson is playing the xenophobia card heavy. What card did Reagan play?
Well, Reagan's big card was the anti-welfare mother card. You know, the limousine, the Cadillac welfare mom. He made a big pitch over. They built these towers in New York for welfare recipients that had Olympic-sized swimming pools, and he made a point of mocking how the welfare recipients were going to live better than any working-class person in New York City. It made great hay, and there's nothing really you would find unusual or objectionable about what he said now.
Yeah.
And I think Thompson's going for that group. He's just trying to pack sort of 8 years of Reagan into like 2 months to get the Republican nomination, to gin up some sort of late entry. But my basic pitch about him is, everybody in Washington loves him. He obviously is great at the dinner table. If you had dinner with him, you would say, God, what a great guy. If only he were president, he would solve the entitlement problem. His heart's in the right place, blah, 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 blah. But he's the classic sort of guy who, when he gets out in the real world, hasn't actually done anything.
I think it's worse than that. I mean, now, presumably, his rhetoric would be tempered somewhat if he were president, but the way he's talking now, he seems so poised to play the xenophobia card on various fronts. I mean, here's the thing on immigration. He says in one of his little, posts, we know that the overwhelming majority of illegals come across the Mexican border. Fortunately, we've got someone who is all too willing to tell us what we should do about it. The president of Mexico, Felipe Calderón. President Calderón doesn't think much of our border policies. I mean, that's just kind of classic. These foreigners are disrespecting us kind of rhetoric. And he kind of goes on in that vein. And of course, you would hope as president he would put it slightly differently. And then in the thing about the movie 300, it's the same kind of thing, So now these sensitive souls in Iran think that Hollywood is part of a U.S. government conspiracy to humiliate them into submission. I can only wish we were that effective. And, I'm not sure that what I'm most looking for in a president is that his foreign policy goals include humiliating Muslims. But then on a more substantive side, in the Wall Street Journal piece you wrote, you sent me by I guess, John Fund.
Right.
A very sympathetic piece, I would say.
Right. Well, that was the big piece, sort of putting Thompson on the map, saying, hey, there should be some word for this piece, that trying to inject him into the presidential race, saying, hey, here's why you should consider Fred Thompson.
Yeah. I mean, here I would just say, this is a more substantive point. He says, Iran may fall of its own weight, and we can help that by offering vocal support to dissident groups and making effective use of the airwaves to reach its people. Well, that can work. It's actually a pretty, I think, tricky issue when being vocal in opposing the regime helps, and when it actually stirs up national sentiment. Sometimes it helps, but it seems like the impression I get from him overall is that his instincts are just very, very much like George Bush's, especially as they were manifested, earlier in the administration, before kind of some realists started to have more influence, which is to say, his tendency is to kind of say what he's thinking without thinking about the consequences, and to not shy away from being divisive, and not to work especially hard to forge cooperative alliances and so on.
Don't you think the Mexican government could use a bit of a wake-up call?
Well, the question is how you deliver it. I mean, my bias is you generally, it's more effective to deliver these things, especially actual threats, in private, because then people don't lose face by complying.
Well, sure, if Thompson was president, but he's not president, he's just an actor in Hollywood, and that's a very effective way to have the president not deliver it, but have somebody who's not president deliver it in very strong language. I mean, they can't continue to base their economy on people coming into our country illegally and working and sending money back home.
Well, fine, but I'm not talking about Fred Thompson being designated spokesperson unofficially. I'm talking about, like, what if he were the president?
If he were the president, he'd say different things.
Well, I hope, but I think if you just look at the way candidates talk, I don't think we've seen kind of xenophobic rhetoric of this kind since maybe Pat Buchanan last ran, if then, really. Even Buchanan put things in a slightly more sophisticated way, it seems to me. Do you know of a candidate in the last 12 years?
Wasn't Reagan like that? And then when he became president, he did a little bit of it.
Well, the Cold War, I mean, it was monarchian. That's not the same. I'm not sure that's the same as xenophobic. That's such a different context, but it's in some ways comparable, I guess.
I also think Bush has sort of inured the country against outbreaks of sort of hating Iran and hating. I mean,
how's that?
People aren't in the mood to be whipped up into another war.
Well, I think you're right, and I think it's kind of odd that I think Thompson clearly, if he's thinking about being president while he's saying these things, he's thinking a lot more about getting the nomination than about winning the general election.
Of course.
Well, right, but that's not all. These things can come back to haunt you. That's not always the smart thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a smart thing if you think the only way you can put yourself on the map for the nomination is to arouse a fervent part of the base, and I think that's clearly his strategy. He's going for the right.
Yeah. Well, he must be very, very charming in person.
Why is that?
That's because everybody seems to like him. I mean, Instapundit likes him. All my friends in Washington like him. I mean, he's just. He's a classic guy who the Georgetown dinner party set would be perfectly happy to have as president.
Quite the ladies' man, is he not?
Well, he's married now.
Yeah, but
he famously dated up a storm when he was single. But you're allowed to do that, and he has a very good answer to that, which is, I plead guilty.
He said, I plead guilty, but I'm still on good terms with all of them. I await further research into that claim.
It seems to me we're beyond the point where if you're single, you can screw around.
Yeah. I'm just trying to liven up our discourse, man.
Okay.
We spent 15 minutes on immigration. I'm just trying to pull them out of their coma, okay?
Yeah. I think Bill Richardson is a different case.
Ooh. Now, you're going to have to back that up. You can't be throwing out innuendo without going up full hog and inviting a slander suit.
There are all these rumors that Richardson's a womanizer, and he has said, oh, they can't be true because I was cleared by the Kerry campaign when they vetted me, and the Kerry campaign says, not so fast. We didn't clear you. We just, you dropped out. So Richardson sort of tried to prick the bubble of rumor, but I wait the interviews with Richardson's exes more than I do with Thompson's, because I think Richardson's married, but maybe I'm wrong.
An important question.
It's an important question that I actually don't know the answer to.
Boy, did you go off half-cocked.
Boy, Bob. That's a descent into double entendre that...
Mickey, get your mind out of the gutter.
Really beneath you.
Mickey, no, seriously. I'm not that kind of guy. What are we going to talk about next? Let's change the subject dramatically. How about the Middle East?
Something that you want to talk about.
What's that? Nicholas Kristof?
Yes.
Yeah, he wrote this column asking why there is not robust debate about Israel and the Palestinians in America, and why the debate is you hear this all the time, the debate is so much more robust in Israel, more of a willingness to criticize Israeli policies and question them, and to identify with the plight of the Palestinians, at least to the point where you can understand where they're coming from. And he said, why is this? That people are so reluctant in America to talk about Israel. You sent me what I don't know if you realize is the answer. You sent me the link to that piece by Ed Koch, formerly the mayor of New York.
Right. And
it's about Kristof's piece, and
right.
He starts, early on you have this flagrant misrepresentation of what Kristof actually said. Koch says, right. Kristof is distressed that the Democratic Party leadership is too supportive of the state of Israel. Well, Kristof was totally clear that, his argument was Republican and Democratic policies, I think, have often had the effect of not being good for the state of Israel.
But you would expect but he clearly expected the Democrats to be, less, to be less pro-Israel is the wrong word, but less inflexible in its support of whatever Israeli government happens to be in power.
You mean Kristof
than
does?
Republicans. Yes.
Well, he expects a more enlightened policy, but the point is that his definition of an enlightened policy is one that would be good for the state of Israel. When Koch says Kristof doesn't want policies too supportive of the state of Israel, that's just not true. Koch, it may not be conscious dishonesty, but it's flagrant misrepresentation. But the point is, Mickey, this is a predictable result of writing the kind of columns Kristof wrote.
Well, right, but that sort of that undermines Kristof's argument in this respect. The anti-AIPAC line, and AIPAC is the pro-Israel lobby that's been argued is way to the pro-Likud, inflexible support of Israel side of the spectrum, even more so than the vast majority of American Jewry. The argument is that AIPAC does not reflect American Jewish opinion. For example, the opinion of all the Jewish voters who were so crucial in Florida. What Koch's, and it's sort of undemocratically representing, failing to represent Jewish voters who are much more liberal and much more skeptical of Israel than AIPAC is. I'm not sure that's true, because Koch's argument, I think, is the authentic voice of a lot of Jewish voters in Florida. And the problem isn't AIPAC. The problem is the Jewish voters.
Well, that's a good question. I think I maybe sent you this blog item written by Nicholas Boudreau, who was guest blogging at the blog of Ezra Klein. You know Ezra, don't you, Mickey?
Yes, he's another guy who...
oh, wait, we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
We'll get to Ezra.
Has a Fred Thompson like
Anyway, I'd certainly like to introduce you if you don't know him. But Nicholas Boudreau asks, why is there not even a remotely sizable lobbying outfit devoted to less hawkish methods of guaranteeing Israel's security? In other words, if what you just said is true, and most American Jews are well to the left of AIPAC, why don't they put their money together is kind of the question implicitly.
Right. And the answer is that they're not. The answer is that in terms of, at least in terms of voting, the Ed Kochs of the world win. And you can't get elected mayor of New York unless you are closer to AIPAC than you are to
Israel Policy Forum.
To the Israel Policy Forum, or there's one guy who's very good who Kristof quotes. Is it M.J.
Rosenberg is at the Israel Policy Forum.
Yeah, okay. And And so this pretense that, the vast majority of views are with the Israel Policy Forum, I just think is the problem with Christoph's argument. Nobody wants to say, the vast majority of American Jews are wrong about what's good for the state of Israel. They all want to say, it's just the evil AIPAC elitists.
But I'm
just not sure that's true.
I've heard astute political observers say what he said. David Korn said it to me. We'll ask David.
Say what?
That American Jewish opinion is the left of AIPAC. I don't know.
It obviously is. The question is to what extent and is it at all possible to mobilize it? It could be like black opinion, which is, blacks were very skeptical of welfare, but you weren't supposed to say that except in intra-black dialogue. You were supposed to sort of show solidarity to the outside world. It's possible that the Jewish dialogue in America is similar.
Yeah, I don't know. It could also be there's an income difference. Maybe the skeptics of AIPAC have less money. But there was also this was also addressed, this particular post by Haggai in the blog American Footprints, which is a very good blog. Deserves probably more traffic than it's getting, though I don't know how much traffic it's getting. But American Footprints is a well thought out, very sober kind of foreign policy blog, mainly, and I commend it. But I mean, one reason the Christoph column got my attention is right now is a good example. It's a very fluid time in Middle East politics with the Palestinians putting this unity government together, and America facing this decision as to how it approaches the unity government. And the decision's still not fully made. We're still kind of feeling our way through the process, and yet, how much do you read about this? I mean, and how much do we talk about it? I mean, every week we talk about the surge, but the policy about the surge is over. It's made, and you can sit there and watch the thing unfold, but there's really nothing to argue about, in effect, because the policy's in cement, and there's almost no discussion of the question of how America should be approaching this Hamas Fatah government.
Well, there is an honest discussion. George Soros wrote a piece in the New York Review of Books, and even though he's the richest man in the world and a big Democratic donor, all the Democrats are rapidly distancing themselves from him. So that's...
I haven't read the piece. Do you know how radical it is, if at all?
No, I think it said basically what Christoph said. I would
suspect he was a little less cautious in his wording, but
it's possible. But Obama, Obama, the last person in the world who can be identified with that point of view, having the middle name Hussein, immediately rebuffed him, and it seems to me.
Well, Obama's on the Christoph quoted, cited Obama's quote, which caught him a lot of trouble, saying nobody is suffering more than the Palestinians, which is
right.
I don't know what he means. If he means that the Palestinians are suffering at least as much as the Israelis, that seems to me like a pretty defensible claim when you look at the numbers and stuff. But
well, and Howard Dean got in trouble for saying we wanted to be even-handed broker.
Actually, that's what Christoph quoted. I'm not sure that's what Dean said. As I recall, what Dean said is we shouldn't pick favorites. But I didn't Google it, so I don't know. And that, I remember when I heard that, I thought, or we shouldn't play favorites or something like that. And I remember thinking, that's tone deaf. You're supposed to say we should be an honest broker, which is what even-handed to me sounds like honest broker. I think you can get by with even-handed. I think he said something slightly less advisable.
Bizarrely, the end of Koch's piece had a very reasonable description of what he thought America's role should be, which is the Arabs know that Israel's our favorite, but they sort of trust us as a broker because we're the only people who could ever whip Israel into line.
We don't have nearly the trust on the Arab side we used to have. This is one thing that Bush has squandered. Not nearly. That's really changed in 4 or 5, 6 years. But the extent to which American troops would be capable of policing a deal.
Isn't it clear that the person who could do what you want an American president to do was Hillary Clinton? Just as I think her historic mission was to bring the left into her campaign and then betray them as she did with welfare reform. So she could. If
she would do it, I think she might be. I think if she would do it, she would be well positioned. The fear on the far left is that she's a slave of AIPAC's. Basically, I don't think that's warranted, but that is the suspicion.
Well, but who isn't a slave of AIPAC?
No,
Howard Dean.
But I mean, more of one. I mean.
Yeah.
The feeling is that Obama is less of one. But
well, but he's it seems to me certainly during the campaign, he's the person who most has to mind his P's and Q's as far as the Israel lobby goes, because he already has that rap, and he grew up as a Muslim. So
his father was a Muslim.
But it turned out he was registered in school for a couple of years as a Muslim.
Yeah.
So.
No, there was some post somewhere about why it is that there's concern, among the AIPACs of the world about his views in the Middle East. And some people said it was just his being black. They thought that might enable him to identify with Palestinians, with the underclass.
Of course that's a worry.
What's that?
Of course that's part of the worry.
Well, it's also,
why would that not be part of the worry?
If you think that an acute understanding of the perspective of the Palestinians could be useful in formulating a deal, that could be an asset. The question is between identifying with a perspective and
right. Well,
wedding yourself to it. You can identify. Well, you want somebody who can identify with both perspectives and then back off and do the deal.
But if your job was to worry about the fate of Israeli government policy, you'd worry about that. I agree.
Well, although those of us who think that Israeli government policy has just not served Israel, would want
right.
Somebody who did a better job of that.
Clearly, Obama has a hill to climb with that group in part because he's black.
I think that's true. He's got a lot of strikes against him, and I don't know. It's interesting. It'll be interesting watching it unfold. Christoph wrote one column about him, saying that his great virtue is just that he had been out in the world, very unlike George Bush. He had been in other countries, grown up, he understood the nature of other cultures, and I think that might well be valuable.
No, I agree. I'm willing to make him the vessel of my hopes and dreams. I'm just I'm not there yet.
I'm concerned about the lack of experience.
Yes.
But
he and Fred Thompson are both people you want to serve as vice president before they become president.
Boy, I'll tell you, a Fred Thompson race would be a clear choice.
It would?
Well, yeah, and exactly the things we're talking about. I mean, Thompson's, xenophobic right-wing rhetoric.
But by the time, if Thompson was in the general election, he'd drop the xenophobic reference and there'd be a rush for the center by both of them.
It's only, I don't know, it depends on how thoroughly you can disavow things you've said within the last year.
They're not, in fact, very far apart.
They are not?
I don't think so, no. They both do well at the same Georgetown dinner party. If they were at the dinner party, there wouldn't be all that much distance between them. If they were on blogging heads, saying what they really thought.
Excellent idea.
Free from the need to put up a phony facade.
Is that what we do? Oh, no, that's what they normally do. I get it.
No. Well, we'll get to this point.
Speaking of great matchups on Blogging Heads TV.
Yeah?
You know this Ezra Klein guy?
Yeah, no, that's my point. I made the mistake of treating Blogging Heads TV as an actual honest conversation between you and me, and I said what I would say in an honest conversation. And it turns out...
You mean the part of that he's a young punk you don't respect?
Yes.
Yeah, that was kind of ill-advised.
I didn't quite...
You forgot about the millions out there in TV land?
Well, I forgot that if you say that in private, it's okay. If you say it in public, you look like an old fogey.
I have let the private-public distinction blur too much for my own good in some of our conversations, but I've got to say, you may get the trophy for that last one.
Well,
No, actually, you don't. In recent weeks, in fact, I've done as well or badly as you.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't like you two either. He doesn't need my approval to succeed.
You don't like who?
In fact, sorry, you two, the rock group. I mean, there are a lot of things I don't like.
Well, you saw. Did you see Ezra's the thing that was posted today?
I did.
He actually threw down the gauntlet. Literally, he got a glove, threw it down.
No, I said what I hadn't realized when I said what I said was how telegenic and effective a debater he is, which of course makes me want to debate him even more, Bob.
So you are going to debate him then?
No, that was being ironic.
So you're not going to debate him?
Look, I barely have the energy to debate you, and you're my best friend.
Well, that's why it's easy to debate me. Never
that
take advantage of your weaknesses.
People think that blogging heads is just easy. Hey, we're just two guys shooting the breeze, and we do it anyway, and that's absurd. It's an incredible amount of work. It screws up my whole week. As you know, I'm grouchy and irritable, and so had we whirled enough in time, one would want to debate everybody, and I'm sure Ezra Klein would want to debate everybody.
It is a frustration, actually. You do want to debate everybody. But you hear them say things, and you want to argue with them. You hear them, and you go, wait, I want to be in the other seat arguing with them. But there's not time enough. Well, Mickey...
I tend to prefer to debate people who I think see the other side and are ready to concede other side's points. People like David Korn or Ann Coulter is actually like that if you talk to her. Ezra, I get the impression he's obviously everybody loves him. He's a good debater. He's got the technique where he holds his head at an angle and it looks hip and MTV and all those things. So he'd kill me at a debate, but I just don't. I prefer people who say, well, unions have some things wrong with them and some good things, but I think the good outweighs the bad. And instead, he sort of runs through a series of sort of talking points, against the secret ballot, saying the secret ballot elections are completely rigged, and saying that there were no wage gains under Clinton, when obviously the neoliberal prescription for wage gains, which is economic growth, hasn't worked. When clearly
Mickey, don't waste your breath on me, buddy. Let's get Ezra on the other side of the camera. You're ready. You're primed.
I'd rather do it long distance.
And these sound like things you could take advantage of.
No, I would probably get killed.
That's your secret fear, isn't it?
Is it a secret fear? I thought I just said it. No, even though I'm completely right, it would his macho youthfulness.
But here's the irony. On the one hand, he's a young punk you don't respect, and on the other hand, you think he would crush you. That seems to me incongruent. I mean, I took don't respect him to mean I don't think he's a very effective thinker or something.
Well, look.
There is not this huge gap between the quality of your position and your rhetorical power.
Yes, there is. When you read blogs, you develop reactions to bylines. When I see Matthew Iglesias' byline, I say, this is an interesting guy. Who knows what he's going to say? He might question liberal orthodoxy. He might question progressive orthodoxy, as he does in the current American Prospect. It's a byline that says, I want to read this. If I see Ezra Klein's byline, I think this is going to be, sort of rote talking points for the progressive movement, and it's just not going to be that interesting. I'm sorry, that's my reaction.
That's funny. He speaks highly of your byline, Mickey. Hey, what do you think when you see my byline?
What I think of your byline?
Yeah. No,
you haven't had a byline lately. You're devoting your life foolishly to Blogging Heads TV.
You're going to see my byline in April, buddy.
What happens in April?
I'm going to rip off 8 newspaper columns like that.
Cool. Well,
for a newspaper near you.
I bet one of them is about the need for intrusive arms control inspections.
Oh, you just filled out the. I was missing one. That's it. Now, Mickey,
Okay,
I have no coercive power. I cannot force you to get into it with Ezra. But I would like to share a little, in kind of a last gasp effort, I would like to share a little story with you if I could.
Sure.
Okay. You know Andy Bowers, your colleague at Slate, and I think soon to be your office mate?
I hope.
Yeah.
He's a great guy.
And you know his father, William Bowers, was a screenwriter?
I sort of knew that.
I'd just like to mention a movie that his father wrote. It's called The Gunfighter, 1950 movie. Hollywood buffs may know it as a kind of precursor of High Noon, which came along 2 years later and shared some of its motifs, okay? And after Andy told me this, I just did a little Googling around about it, and I would just like to share some of it with you and see if you identify with the plot at all. Okay?
Okay. This is incredibly tangential, but go ahead.
Don't bet on it.
Okay.
Jimmy Ringo is the fastest gun in the West, but he is getting tired of it all and would like to retire. This is from a website about the movie. But wherever he goes, there's always some tough kid who wants to try to beat him to the draw. Okay, another website describes him as aging gunslinger Jimmy Ringo, okay, and he's plagued by the town's young hothead who is scheming to see just how fast Jimmy is, okay? You getting this?
Well, I'm getting it, but this assumes that I am some sort of famous aging gunslinger. A, I'm not in the gunslinging business.
B, you're not famous.
B,
C,
I'm not famous.
okay, 1 out of 3.
C, Ezra Klein probably is bigger in the blogosphere than I am. In fact, it's
Mickey,
good for
you
me.
invented the blogosphere.
It's
Some people have called you the inventor of the blog.
But they've quickly forgotten all that. But Ezra, it does me good to have Ezra going around blabbing about me more than it would do him good to have me going around blabbing about him.
Mickey, I found one picture from the movie The Gunfighter, and I'm just going to share it with our viewers. The Gregory Peck figure, with whom you would naturally identify, is, standing up, okay, sprawled across the floor, is a young punk, according to the caption, who lies dead after a duel with Gregory Peck. I just want to say it is possible for an aging gunfighter to prove triumphant, Mickey, and all I ask is that you keep your mind open.
I actually feel more like the guys in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is a great movie, but it was shot...
That's another movie this is a precursor of, because it shows the kind of downside of being like a gun, a gunslinger.
Right, it's about another aging gunslinger, but it was shot when John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart were about 60 or 70 years old. So they're these old creaky guys wandering around trying to pretend that they're 40 years old. Once you realize that, it's sort of hilarious.
So you are not going to facilitate
it's still a great movie.
Blogging Head's evolution toward, I don't know if I've really shared with you our business model, but the plan is that this become much more like professional wrestling. And you're not going to help us out there?
Do you want me to don a costume and take off my
face
shirt?
off with Ezra, yes.
Life is short. You gotta,
Okay. There's a separate business model that maybe you can help me out with. It's also related to the movie The Gunfighter. It says, this is from one of the websites, we've been trying to make money off these Blogging Heads T-shirts. This gives me a better idea.
Right.
Gregory Peck embodies the bone-tiredness of a man who only wants a drink in peace and becomes a piñata for every hotshot looking for a shortcut to infamy. Mickey, you can probably imagine what I've got in mind.
A piñata with
Mickey Kaus
various
piñatas.
Yeah. But that assumes that. In fact, I started this fight with Ezra. It's not like he was out gunning for me. So
no, forget Ezra. I'm talking about marketing Mickey Kaus piñata. Daily Kos would buy like 7 million.
No, they wouldn't. You vastly overestimate.
That was my last gasp. I give up.
I think a Bob Wright piñata though, or a Bob Wright E.T. doll.
Some of our commenters. I'll tell you, you could sell a Bob Wright piñata to possibly a majority of our commenters lately. I got to say. Not that I'm taking it personally.
They've turned against you.
They have.
It's a sea change.
They have. I know.
What can I say?
Must have been something I said, or how I said it.
I think it was how you said it.
Yeah.
Or perhaps how often you said it.
Speaking of which, we're transitioning to comments now?
Yes.
Now, I promised not to mention you-know-who, which I think is in both of our interests. But as far as comments, the flag, I would mention this one by Uncle Ebenezer, probably not his real name, possibly an allusion to a Dickens character, who... it is about that very subject of you-know-who that we're not going to talk about.
Right.
He says, my advice to Bob would be to chill out on the topic. So I will do that. However, I do want to link to that comment because everything else in it, pretty much, I think, or just about, does a really admirable job of characterizing my view.
Okay.
Now, there's another post from Uncle Ebenezer that I might, another comment that I might also link to, just a fragment. I love Mickey for his personality and what it adds to the chemistry of BHTV. But when it comes to expertise, my bet is that Ezra would wipe the floor with Mickey, and Mickey knows it.
Well...
Can I link to that one?
You can link to all these.
Okay.
Everybody says Ezra knows a lot about a lot, so my problem with him is not that he's not knowledgeable. I had breakfast with Jonathan Cohn, and he said, he likes Ezra, and he knows a lot about, because he has this vast store of knowledge. So, He has a vast store of knowledge.
I also want to commend a commenter who goes under the name of Dell. After my dialogue with Mike Hirsch, we had thrown around the term realism, without properly defining it. And he actually teaches the subject on foreign policy and runs down some of the classic hallmarks of realism, which is very useful and something I'm proud of our comments section for having people so learned. And I don't know, you don't have any comments?
No, we should call this the Bob Gold Star section.
Yes.
You're like these are the term papers that you're giving stars to.
No, quite the contrary. I am humbled by them.
Oh, okay.
But no, it's true, I mean, I couldn't figure it out. Is it that the comment section is turning against me, or that, liberals are getting overwhelmed by... one thing I noticed, actually, a few weeks ago, I noticed that the comment section started getting a little snippier and meaner and more personal, and I thought, well, I guess that the civility had to wear off, familiarity breeds contempt. And then it seemed to me that it took a shift to the right in tenor, and I wondered, is it true, then, that when the going gets tough, liberals cut and run?
Well, I think liberals might have better things to do than defend their turf on Blogging Heads TV.
Well, they were enjoying it for a while.
They were doing it for a while, but they might be like the Mahdi Army, which is when the American forces show up, they fade into the woodwork.
Kind of like cutting and running, but not exactly.
Well, but they have other battlefields to fight their war on. They don't have to win the Blogging Heads primary.
This leads to a tangential question. And as it happens, I think it's related to the Ezra issue, but that's irrelevant. There was this blog item about you that you linked to, and you said, I probably deserved this. That's all your blog said, and it linked to this other item, right?
Right.
You remember this?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I was reading that comment section on that blog, its item. What blog? It was...
the Lawyers, Guns, and Money. Yeah.
And in fact, I probably have the name of the post. You probably have the name of the actual blogger. That's a multi-blog blogger, right?
I think it's something named LaFarkins or something like that.
Or a multi-blogger blog. No, that's what the URL says. It was like McFarley or something.
Okay.
But my question to you is, I was reading the comments on that blog, and they were all anti-Mickey, anti-Mickey, anti-Mickey. Then there were a bunch of pro-Mickey ones, or a few pro-Mickey ones, and then one of the anti-Mickey people says, wait a second, where did all the sock puppets come from? And one of the pro-Mickey people says, Mickey linked to this. That's where we came from. And my question, I had never thought of this. Do bloggers link to items in order to adulterate the comments section that would otherwise be anti-them?
Probably some do, but I wasn't thinking of that. But that's actually a good strategy. I was just thinking it was a vigorously written post, and it
has some very good lines.
I had come across as an old fogey, and he said, cows fell face first into the mud in the battles of neoliberalism.
That was the best line.
And there was a certain truth to that. And compared with Ezra Klein's post, it's much better written. So I linked to it.
Okay, well.
So it had a point, maybe 2 points, and as Ann Coulter has a point, it had a point, and it was vigorously done. So, and the guy's been, sort of gracious when I've failed to take umbrage at his incessant attacks on me. So.
Yeah. No, you clearly opted for the extreme graciousness strategy in the wake of this Ezra Klein.
There must be a word for... It's not frenemies. We're not frenemies. We're friends. In other words, we're...
Former enemies?
We're not friends who are secretly enemies. We're enemies who are secretly cordial to each other. Or I like to think we are. He's going to say, no, I really hate you.
Wait, you mean you and Ezra?
No, me and Lawyers, Guns, and Money.
Oh, well, that could be. I think it's safe to not describe your relationship with Ezra that way at this moment.
No. We're probably not that, yes.
Okay, so the gauntlet has been thrown down, and... Okay.
I just can't see it. I'm looking,
Okay.
What can I say?
No, it's okay, really. It's okay. So you got anything else?
No, we almost came in under an hour, but
then I went on and on.
Correct.
Started complaining about the comments.
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
Let the record show who is vain and who willy-nilly tarnishes their own image.
You mean it's not all about Bob?
No, it is all about Bob.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. See ya.
See ya.